Welcome. My name is Tony Russell, and in this module, I will be discussing market sizing for early and mid-stage programs. Developing forecasts for early programs is one of the core capabilities within new product planning. I will be covering the high-level aspects of developing forecasts that are stage appropriate. I've listed additional resources in the video description below, so please feel free to review those materials. The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely mine and do not represent those of my current or previous employers. For this module, I will be covering the following objectives. Understand the importance of conducting stage-appropriate forecast assessments of early to mid-stage programs. Understand key goals and approaches for stage-appropriate forecast assessments. Understand common variables used in devising forecasts. And understand approaches for communicating uncertainty. There are a few common questions that come up with the issue of sizing early and mid-stage programs. Some common questions include: how big does the market need to be for it to be attractive? How many patients will be needed to make a market big enough for us? What's our potential market share given the current market? And what's the total market size assuming we get 100% market share? In most cases, the context for these questions is being driven by the need to make a go/no-go decision for an early stage program. However, evaluating a program on just one of these parameters may not provide enough details on the value of the program. Conducting shallow, single-aspect assessments of early-stage programs may not provide information to support a confident decision. To cover why these shallow assessments can be misleading, I've laid out some common issues that come up in early and mid-stage program sizing. I'll describe the challenge with each issue and provide recommendations on suggested refinements. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list. The first issue that can come up is to ignore patient segments. This issue can come up when teams want to address all patients in a certain disease state. For example, the team may want to address all asthma patients or all patients with atopic dermatitis. The challenge with this approach is that by trying to address all patients in a disease area, it may not align with the value proposition of your specific program. For example, your program may provide high utility for severe patients and very little utility for milder patients. The recommendation here is to define specific patient segments. Another issue that can arise is to ignore competition. Competition can include any established habits with standard of care as well as any emerging programs that could enter the market. Competition will certainly have an impact on the potential size of the market for your program, so spend the time to define the market competition. There can also be naive market share assumptions when sizing early-stage programs. There is a common fallacy that goes as follows: the market is so huge that all we need is a small percentage to be successful. Market share is to be earned and it is never given. When sizing programs, defining market share clearly and with documentation will be important. We'll come back to this topic in a few slides. The last issue I wanted to cover was the one of ignoring costs. Many times when sizing an early-stage program, there is a focus on the potential revenue. It's important to step back and look at the potential costs to bring your program to market in a particular indication. Along with revenue, costs, and risk assessments, you can derive a high-level view of the return on investment for a particular indication. Going through this exercise can actually be helpful in refining an indication approach for your program. The goals for market sizing can vary depending on where the program is in terms of clinical development. It is important to note that the degree of precision needed for a forecast can be different based on the stage of development as well. A common mistake is to over-engineer and over-invest in developing sophisticated forecast models for early-stage programs. We'll cover suggestions on forecast approaches in the next couple of slides. For early-stage programs, the goals could include using the forecast to help prioritize potential indications as well as getting a high-level estimate of the potential market. In many cases, the initial forecasts enable comparisons across other internal programs. For mid-stage programs, the goals can include refining the estimate with more specificity on assumptions. This can include specificity on share, size of patient segments, as well as the impact of future competition. For late-stage programs, forecasts become much more detailed and require extensive calibration using primary market research. The refinement can be based on the evolution of the landscape and scenarios around TPP, market access changes, and pricing assumptions. At this stage, more work may be needed to adjust for targeting specific geographical regions. For the current module, we will be focusing on sizing for early and mid-stage programs. This reference slide provides an overview of the goals, challenges, and suggested approaches for developing a stage-appropriate forecast for an early-stage program. This information comes from the new Product Planning Playbook, and the link is provided in the footnote. Similar to the previous slide, here is a reference from the new Product Planning Playbook covering the goals and key aspects of developing and forecast for a mid-stage program. As you can see, there is more that needs to be done for a mid-stage program compared to an early-stage program. A common challenge that comes up in market sizing for early programs is estimating market share. Doing primary market research to define market share for an early program may not be helpful and is more likely not cost-efficient. So what to do when you don't have the budget for primary market research but want to have an informed assumption on market share? Here, I'll present a couple of recommendations, and I'm sure there are other approaches that others can recommend. One suggestion is to estimate market share based on an analog. If you have access to sales or prescription data, you could define a similar market and look at how analogs did in terms of peak year share. Then you can calibrate on the specifics of your program. Another suggestion is to use an order of entry approach. This approach is fairly common and is based on the work by McKinsey using data from a large collection of launches. Think of the number of products already in the market that would be direct competitors, and then what is your order of entry based on your current assumptions. This approach can be used with the analog approach to help triangulate on potential share assumptions. For early stage programs, it may not be advisable to spend a lot of energy on defining the market share down to a specific number. A range would certainly suffice. In some cases, there will be a desire to have an annualized sales forecast for early stage programs. In this situation, having sales uptake curves can be quite helpful. When using uptake curves, it can provide a way to model the impact of external events as well as the impact of competitors entering the market. For early-stage programs in preclinical or phase 1, a focus on peak year sales is sufficient for most cases. One recommendation on modeling sales uptake curves is to use data based on analogs. This can be helpful when there are strong analog candidates. Of course, it helps to calibrate the sales curve for your program based on any specifics not covered by the analog. The more common approach is to use uptake curves based on archetype launches. These uptake curves can be prepared based on analogs to represent different types of launches and then used for your specific program as needed. There are many ways to develop a forecast, but I wanted to cover some of the more common variables used in building a forecast. This approach is based on using epidemiology as the starting point. This is a different approach compared to using existing sales data as a starting point. I've listed the variables here along with a high-level description. You can think of this as a funnel where the number starts large at the beginning and then gets smaller as we account for the impact of each variable. In terms of accounting for drug treatment rate, I've listed two variables here: drug-treated rate and advanced-treated rate. The drug-treated rate refers to the initial overall drug treatment rate of patients. Think of this as a first-line treatment rate. The advanced treated rate refers to patients that receive additional therapy beyond initial treatment. Think of this as later-line therapy. In some forecast models, lines of therapy are broken out as separate variables to help with tracking. When it comes to assumptions around market access, price, and gross to net, be sure to work very closely with your colleagues in market access. These are complex variables, and having the right expertise will be helpful. Obviously, it will be important to build the forecast model specific to your program and your organization's needs. And one last important note, always document and provide references supporting the assumptions behind each variable. This is absolutely critical as changes are likely to occur, and it's important to know what drove the assumptions behind the model. Forecast models can be as complex as you will want to make them. It helps to start simple and then build based on your specific needs. I've listed some other assumptions to consider for your revenue forecast, as these can have an effect on your projections. Most of these are straightforward, but I wanted to call out a couple for further discussion. It is not uncommon to see diagnosis and treatment rates increase once a new therapeutic is introduced. This is seen in disease indications where nothing was approved before or standard of care leaves a large degree of unmet need. Accounting for year-over-year price increases as well as yearly gross-to-net changes will be important. Consider the level of competition expected over the time horizon of your forecast to assess the degree of discounting that might be needed. Your colleagues in market access can help with this aspect. Clearly, forecasts come with a large degree of uncertainty. And this is especially true for early to mid-stage programs. As I tell my colleagues, the only thing I know for certain about a forecast is that it is wrong. A good practice to establish when building forecasts is to include information around the impact of uncertainty. I'll provide a couple of examples for reference. A 3x3 grid showing the impact on revenue for a couple of variables can be a good way to structure a discussion around uncertainty and potential scenarios. Invariably, there will be a question about why isn't the forecast higher than expected. This particular example shows the impact of ranges for price and market share. It could easily be other variables, but these two are the usual players. This grid approach helps show what is needed to believe in order to achieve a higher forecast. By showing it this way, most discussions gravitate towards reasonable expectations rather than trying to set each variable to the maximum. A more common approach for illustrating uncertainty is the tornado diagram. In this case, only one variable is changed at a time and the impact on revenue is illustrated. This approach helps to illustrate where the forecast the model is most sensitive to in terms of changes. The diagram can also be helpful in describing potential what-if scenarios. In this example, an increase in price can have a substantial impact on the forecast. As we come to the end of this module, I think it's important to cover some key learnings. It is important to size the opportunity in a stage-appropriate fashion. Be careful and don't overinvest, but also don't conduct shallow assessments. Hopefully, the guidance in this module can help provide ways of doing stage-appropriate forecasting. Be sure to document and reference every assumption in a forecast. Forecasts are living documents and will evolve over time. As assumptions change, it will be critical to understand the assumption before the change. Having good referencing behaviors will be quite helpful. Ensure that the forecast methodology is transparent so that key functions understand critical drivers in the forecast. A mistake commonly made is to treat the forecast as a black box problem where it is unclear how the numbers were derived. To build trust and credibility, transparency in the forecast model will be paramount. Inherently, forecasts have a large degree of uncertainty. There is no way to avoid it. So be sure to articulate the uncertainty upfront and the key scenarios around the impact of the uncertainty. For early to mid-stage programs that are many years away from launch, I've found that ranges on the forecast are more helpful than providing a point estimate on peak year sales. These ranges will reflect the uncertainty inherent in the forecast. If required by your organization to provide a point estimate, I would recommend doing so and provide key uncertain variables underlying the point estimate. And lastly, I wanted to provide some resources that might be helpful. The textbook from Arthur Cook is foundational to forecasting work and provides a great expert's perspective on building forecasts. We recently had a new product planning forum on forecasting that will certainly be important to review. And we also had a new product planning forum on the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act on pipeline assessment. The impact of the Inflation Reduction Act on forecast assumptions will be important to consider as you think about your early to mid-stage programs. I hope you found this module helpful. Please feel free to contact me via LinkedIn if you have any questions or feedback. And be sure to visit the new product planning website for additional resources. Thank you.